It really was about, how do I take this skill set that I've built over 20 years and use it to create impact in a different space? I always say it's, how do I create impact for people who truly have skin in the game, right? Not just investors, PE firms, and things like that. It's, how do I help multi-generational businesses? How can I help small businesses feed their families, hire more people, create impact that I can see like immediately? And it feels so different to bring that skill set into this space.
Hello and welcome to Center for Victory's podcast of Your Best Day Yet. At Center for Victory, we're here to help unlock, reinforce, and enrich relationships through personal and professional development. I'm Eric Guy, Chief Victory Officer here at the Center for Victory. With us today is a lady I guess I just recently met, but I feel like I know her a little bit better. I don't know why. But I think it's because, well, I know what it's because. It's because I like what she does and how she makes it simple. But Lauren Furtado, CEO of Unconventional CFO Services. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
Yeah. So why I said that is because, accounting, things like that, very difficult for myself and some other people and the clients we work with sometimes, especially the smaller guys under 50, under 100 employees. It becomes somewhat difficult and somewhat unsurmounting sometimes. But I love how you break it down. But I'm going to let you give your brief intro and your mission behind what you're doing.
Yeah, so I am the owner of a fractional CFO services firm, and usually people say, "What in the world is a fractional CFO?" It's usually the immediate response. So fractional really just implies part-time, right? You, as a big company, typically in your C-suite of executives have a chief financial officer that sits on your leadership team. So this is access to a CFO on a part-time basis for a smaller company. I always say the mission for our firm is to get you to the point where you need someone full-time. Love to grow you to the point where you're really ready to have somebody on staff, and managing the day-to-day decisions full-time. But there's a sweet spot of kind of that in between of being small until you grow to that point, if that's even in your wheelhouse of what your goals are. So what we come in and do is provide services to help really make decisions and drive growth and meet your goals. And we focus on strategy. I like to explain accounting as kind of rear view versus windshield. Accountants, bookkeepers, tax preparers are looking at the results of what's already happened. Fractional CFO truly is focused on where we're heading, right? So think of it as the GPS. We're sitting in the car and I'm telling you the directions on how to get where we need to go.
Yeah, well, that's a great explanation. I'm already learning more again. So, folks, I've talked to Lauren, and I know this. I just know it's so difficult for a lot of people to get their head wrapped around their money, their budget, and everything like that. But what inspired you? Because you're a little different. I mean, I would say you're unconventional. But what inspired you to move in the direction that you did?
Yeah. So for a quick context, from a background perspective, I went a very traditional route in accounting. When I finished my master's degree, I went and worked for a Big Four public accounting firm, and I stayed there for almost 20 years. It was a very competitive environment. It was very challenging intellectually. It was, demonstrating my work ethic. It was very like up or out situation. And I thrived in that environment. I was willing to work hard, give me all the things, teach me all the things, show me all the things. And I was able in those 20 years to see so many different companies, transactions, work with so many amazing, smart people. But where the rubber hit the road for me really was, I'll say it started when I became a mother. Being a working parent in an environment that is very high demand is difficult. And for me, at the time, my husband was working, he was an electrician. So he was working double shifts, he's working night shift. So I was responsible for doing drop off and pick up still with daycare and go to work. And I was feeling very spread thin. I felt terrible at everything. I was the last one to get to the office. I was the first one to leave because I had to pick the kids up. And then I was so exhausted and feeling impatient with them at the end of the day. I really was struggling, but I will say working for a big company, there's options. So before I left, I actually had a really good position. I had taken a fully remote role after I had my daughter. And then I also was working a flexible schedule. So what that means is I was getting part of my salary and I was only working part of the hours. So I was working 8 to 3 every day. I was able to pick the kids up. But I will say, even in that situation where I'm being well paid, I had flexibility. I was working from home. So I felt actually really good about how I was showing up at work and how I was showing up at home. For me, there were personal circumstances that really drove an evaluation. And what I mean by that is unexpectedly in 2021, my husband passed away. So here I was now left as the sole provider in my home. I was now the only parent to grieving children and obviously grieving myself. Our plans for our life were completely shattered, right? As you can imagine, you're grieving the loss of the person, but you're also grieving like the future and what could have been and all the plans that we were building our life around. And so for me, once the dust settled in like the very heavy early grief days, I couldn't help but look at how I was spending my time and how I was making my money. Although I had felt very satisfied and accomplished in my career and I was doing great, I really was craving impact. And faith for me was a big component of the last few years of my life and truly reflecting on what God was calling me to do. And it wasn't feeding these huge multi-billion dollar corporations anymore. It really was about how do I take this skill set that I've built over 20 years and use it to create impact in a different space. I always say it's how do I create impact for people who truly have skin in the game, right? Not just investors, PE firms, and things like that. It's how do I help multi-generational businesses? How can I help small businesses feed their families, hire more people, create impact that I can see like immediately, and it feels so different to bring that skill set into this space. And that's truly what drove me making that shift, leaving that very comfortable, well-paying, consistent job in a space where I had a lot to lose, right? Like there's a lot of pressure as a single parent, as a solo parent. And I was willing to make that jump in faith.
It's a very inspiring story. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And that kind of leads me into some of the things that you do, really not just helping people with their finances, but with the blocks that come from them. So that's the first question I'm going to ask you. Like, what are the most common mental and emotional blocks you see like leaders face when it comes to their finances?
Yeah, so I think in the space of the industries that I serve, right, blue collar businesses, I always say, right, it's general, it's contractors, it's subcontractors, it's service based companies, but ultimately, most of their stories are that they came up through the trade and then became a business owner. It usually isn't I'm an entrepreneur and I like bought an electrical company or a plumbing business or whatever it is. So their background isn't in finance, right? They ultimately come up and grow quickly sometimes, that some of these concepts that they have never truly grasped, either they don't have the understanding, and that creates, I think, a couple things. Insecurity about asking for help, like, hey, I'm making $5 million of revenue. And like, I don't understand the difference between gross profit and net profit. And I'm so embarrassed to ask that. Right. But this is a guy who's like used to working with his hands and working with the crew and things like that, that when you have to shift from being a doer to a CEO, it is such a big jump, and finances are a part of that. And unfortunately, I think with accountants, we get a bad rap, and sometimes justifiably, because we use language that people don't necessarily understand. We're throwing out acronyms and KPIs and all this craziness that like the eyes glaze over, and like people have a hard time saying, "What can you slow down?" And what does that mean? Like, it feels like you should know it. So you're feeling like insecure about asking for help. think that's one way it manifests. But then I think also the lack of knowledge sometimes manifests in ego, of being too proud. Like I've already run my business and made $5 million without having to look at these spreadsheets and do all this stuff you're telling me I need to do. So why do I need help? Right. So like that ego of I'm already doing it okay. So why do I need to do anything differently? I think is another way, again, that lack of knowledge will manifest.
Um, how do you help folks shift from like that fear-based decision making to
Mm.
getting better clarity and becoming more confident? Because I think that's a big piece of it. Like we don't look at it because it feels overwhelming. So how do we get that clarity and confidence?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly why I named my firm Unconventional CFO, right? Our approach is to simplify. And I just want to clarify, there's a difference between it being easy and being simple, right? So it's hard, but it can be simple. And there are a few metrics that you can focus on and make it digestible and um, get your arms around it. Like nothing excites me more than seeing the light bulb go off of when you're explaining these concepts and why it's important and what do we need to look at and why are we doing it. And going back to ultimately the goal setting of each of the owner, I think helps ground it as well. So the reason we want to look at net profit is because we want to get to this goal. So it's being able to make the connection between the metrics and the simple process and where we want to go, where people are disconnected. And it's like, well, if you don't understand why we're reviewing this stuff, then it's not going to be helpful for you.
Mhm. Explain, if you would, the connection between that financial clarity and like personal peace.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because during our onboarding, I think people sometimes don't expect me to pry on their personal lives, but I do. Whether you like it or not, that at the end of the day, understanding the dynamics of what your personal goals are. And listen, I might say, Eric, okay, we're going to do onboarding and we're going to talk about goals next week. I need you to actually go talk to your wife before that conversation and make sure that you're aligned on what your personal financial goals are and what that looks like. And listen, it doesn't always have to be, oh, we're sending our daughter to college and we want to save X amount of money so we can help her pay for it, or we're buying another house. It can also be, I want to spend less time in the business, right? So it can be things where you're stressed out and you're taking it out at home. Like the relationship piece gets repaired if we can ultimately pull you out of some of the day-to-day transaction stuff. Because besides financial strategy and the numbers stuff, process is so big. And it's if we can put a system in place, if we can hire somebody and we know we can afford to do it and feel confident about those numbers, then that's going to alleviate some of the pressure for you at home as well. So we do spend a lot of time digging into that personal stuff and saying, okay, now how do those personal things fit into the business and how do we make those things happen? So honestly, in our dashboards, we keep those things and we look at them every month. We're talking about them. Okay, how are we progress wise on that goal of pulling you out of the business for 20 hours a week, right? All right, we're about halfway there. What are the next steps to get there? So the only way to action items is to understand like the progress it's making toward the again that path we want to get to when we're sitting in the car and deciding what's the GPS to get there.
Um, what has it been like? Like, let's talk about inspiration again. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, because I think that's why I'm drawn to you a little bit is the inspiration that you bring. Yeah, like what's your journey been like a woman trying to build that credibility and a client base, but in a lot of your work with contractors too. I mean, what have you seen? What have you overcome?
Yeah, it's interesting because although the financial world is a bit more of a mix, kind of men to women, right? It still is pretty male dominated. And even like that struggle I talked about earlier about like being a parent, I was, I'll say, up against other, like at the time I was a senior manager and they had stay-at-home wives, right? So like I had a dynamic at home that was difficult to manage when their situations at home were very different, right? That like they just had the ability to um be at work more hours and rely on help at home. I just didn't have that luxury. So that was really hard for me, to be honest. But I think also it gave me the perspective of like building my firm in a way that fits my life, where I'm not an employee of it, that it truly, when I talk about the personal goals, that's one thing for me, is the balance of being the mother that I truly want to be and showing up for the kids and still being able to do really great client service. So that's kind of one piece. I think as it relates to in the contracting business and like it being very male dominated, I think honestly, sometimes you need that feminine perspective. I'm very assertive. I am very direct. I'm from the Northeast, right? Like there's an element of no BS with me. So I think I bring that to it, but also like I'm not going to pretend to be over masculine. That like I do bring feminine energy to it as well, and I have empathy, and I truly bring my personality to it, good, bad, or indifferent. That I think the mix of both helps when it relates to something sensitive like finances. That it's not. I refer to it as a financial nakedness. Like it is an intimate thing, and it is creating an environment where an owner feels trust and feels comfort, being able to talk about the dynamics at home, that maybe there is some stress in a marriage, or talking about those personal goals. So it truly is about embracing that and being able to demonstrate the value that that brings.
Good morning. I hope you are enjoying this episode of Center for Victory podcast. My name is Caleb Cole, and I'm inviting you on our adventures. Check out the Center for Victory website under the Experiences tab and join us on some of the most epic adventures in the U.S. Let's go.
Yeah. What's the biggest misconception business owners have about financial health?
That it can be ignored. I think it's just about like, listen, over reliance on like your bank account balance today. And it's again that mentality of like, I've made it this far without doing something different, so it's fine. But there is a world where it can look very different. It can look different in opportunity. It can look different in less stress. It can look very different. And just the ability to ask for help. Because I think people ultimately, when they look at fractional CFO services, they're like, oh my gosh, it's so expensive. And for what, right? Like, what value am I getting? But it's understanding there is such empowerment. This is where I get like really excited. I'm like, people ask, Lauren, how do you get so lit up about this? I'm like, it's not about the numbers. It's about what you can do with them. That like, there's so much opportunity. If you've built a business that from the outside is looking pretty good, that like you can go so much further understanding the numbers, understanding the impact of your decisions before you do them. So I think it's just understanding that like the current situation, even if it doesn't feel that uncomfortable, can look very different.
Two words for you that just came to mind, and it's not on the outline here, that I want you to talk about: cash flow.
Yes, my favorite. So cash flow is literally where I spend the most time with clients, right? When we talk about strategy, it is a tool for us to make those decisions, to understand the financial impact of things before we do them, right? It's the ability to shift from reactive to proactive in terms of that decision making and how the data and the numbers fit into that. So cash flow truly is forecasting. So we want to project out over a period of time the cash inflows and outflows in your business. The reason this is important is because even if you look at your income statement, otherwise known as your P&L, and you look profitable, there is a difference between when you see revenue in a sale and you actually collect cash from a customer. So today I can earn revenue, I can send an invoice, but maybe it doesn't come in for 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. And guess what? In the world of contractors, I still got to pay guys, right? I still need to execute the jobs to earn the revenue to be able to send the invoice. So it is so important to look at your cash flow forecasting so you understand when cash will come in the door, so you can understand when you can allow cash out of your business. So it's Obviously, you have vendors to pay. You may have loan obligations, interest expense, admin salaries. Like there's a million different things, right, in terms of expenses. But there's ability to change things within the cash flow if we can identify at least where we have issues, where we have shortfalls. And the answer, even if we have a shortfall, isn't always doomsday. Oh my God, you're going to go out of business, right? Well, I just had a client where we got a $3 million line of credit, right? So we have the ability to borrow on that just to help Band-Aid until we get to, a couple of months from now when like the cash is really going to be coming in, and it's going to more than compensate for the fact that we're paying some interest on that money. So there's the ability to identify issues, identify opportunities to improve cash flow. And I always say too that like there's the ability to negotiate, and inventory management's another one where it's worth like, hey, are we optimizing this? Does this make sense on how we're purchasing? Does the frequency need to be different? But also like calling a vendor and saying like, hey, I know typically our invoices are due at the first of the month. Any chance we can move that to the 15th? Like you can have conversations and have the ability to move things around if you understand the timing of when, again, you can allow cash out of the business.
And I think that's really important, at least from my work with you in the the top contractor school. A lot of those folks are growing, and
Yep.
they need that flexibility, and they don't know how to get it or gain it. The pieces to move, and that's where you have I think come in and been extremely handy.
Yeah, absolutely. The one area too, I think, as you're growing, that I have found within the group and just in general with contractors is the pricing piece. And it's making sure that estimating is appropriate, because I know I said, hey, on the P&L, you're profitable. I think even more so, it's improving that profitability before we even get to cash flow and making sure that you have accurate estimating and bidding and that your pricing is appropriate. You're doing overhead allocations appropriately is a really good thing to focus on as well.
Yeah. What key systems should every business have in place to grow?
Yeah. So when we talk finance, there has to be a level of bookkeeping. So depending on your size, I would suggest different systems, specific IT solutions, but whatever works for you. I always say like, I actually don't even care if you do it in a spreadsheet as long as it gets done. Something you're actually going to use, but making sure often QuickBooks Online is used by kind of the smaller organizations until you're ready for like a full NetSuite or a big ERP that might be, the solution going forward of everything. Foundations is another one that quite a few of my clients have. But I would say just a bookkeeping system of record. That's one. Two is just a process around financial reporting. So, okay, great. The bookkeeper is doing their job. Now, what's the process you have to look at it? So it's really around accountability as the owner of reviewing the finances and reviewing the metrics that you need to.
Yeah, that's good stuff. How can that right financial setup actually free up time and reduce stress?
Yeah, huge. So there's studies out there that talk about more than half of small business owners say that the number one stress of running their business is managing finances. And they spend upwards of 21 hours a week on finances. And most of that time is stressing about it, not necessarily acting on it, but like worrying about it. So when we talk about the ability to alleviate and create clarity, there's such opportunity to do some of that intangible stuff. That's why it's always interesting when people talk about like an ROI on fractional CFO services. I was like, not only can we improve profitability, increase cash flow, but we can also alleviate that stress in that time and create space for you to go focus on other things. Because I think when you have somebody in your corner helping you to review those financial metrics and talk to about the decisions, it brings you out of like that isolation of feeling stressed and kind of ruminating in your head about like what the decisions could be or should be. that you at least have someone in the leadership team with you to be able to talk through some of that stuff. So honestly, it's like a therapy session each month of like, hey, and it's gauging, hey, how do you feel about this? Like, do we feel better? Do we feel worse? Like, what do you still need clarity on? So I think it's just understanding like the time that is spent on those things and the relationship piece I talked about before, right? That impacts maybe how you interact with your team and your guys, the people in your office or your kids at home. So just understanding that reducing some of that stress and some of that pressure by creating clarity is ultimately going to benefit everybody.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, finances, being, my background as a therapist and everything,
Mm-hmm.
working inside any kind of family. I mean, that's the number one cause of, arguments, a lot of times divorce and things like that. So, and we see it a lot, obviously you and I see it a lot with all the contractors we work with
Yeah.
as well. So it's a big,
Eric, can I pause for 1 second? The nurse is calling from school
yeah,
for the second time.
yeah. Again. All right. So, Lauren, are you ready for the rapid fire round here?
I
All
am.
right. So this is always interesting to me. Um, and I actually had somebody do this to me yesterday, so I love it. So here we go. We've got, I think, 5 there. So favorite productivity tool or hack?
Sure. It feels very simple, this answer, but I live and die by the calendar. They say if you're interested, it lives in your head, and if you're committed, it lives in your calendar. So just blocks of time that truly are used for whatever that block is and not negotiating that. So your day isn't filled with meetings back to back to back. And then at the end of the day, you're wondering what you got done.
Good. A quote you live by.
Yeah, so I'm going to go biblical on you.
Okay.
Proverbs 16. So commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans. Truly, entrepreneurship for me and the last 4 years now of my life have been about surrendering everything to the Lord.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Go-to coffee order.
Just black.
All
Yep,
right.
strong and black.
See,
No frills,
another
no
reason I
sugar,
like
no
you.
milk. That's it. Give me the coffee. I don't want all the fluff.
Another one mistake you learned the most from.
I think within the context of my business, just thinking I had to do it all alone, and that I had to learn every, nook and cranny of trying to run my own business. Because the client service stuff is very natural. But it's, sales and marketing, it's legal, it's, all the hats you have to wear when you're doing solopreneurship. So I think I would have hired earlier than I did, and just asking for help, which is what I encourage clients to do right on the financial side. So it's, just asking for help earlier in the process for things I wasn't good at.
What does success mean to you today?
Yeah. It's about that balance. I talked about that struggle at the beginning that I had with my career. For me, it's about creating impact and having, my hand in being able to help people, but then being able to have dinner and uninterrupted time with my kids.
Yeah, that's great. Before we get to our last question here, where can people find you?
Yeah, probably the best place is on LinkedIn. Honestly, it's probably where I'm most active. I'm also on Instagram, or my website as well. But I would say the best place to reach out is usually LinkedIn or Instagram.
Yeah, and you really get back to people too. So uh, I will say that. So the last thing we always ask everybody is, because it's your best day yet,
Yes.
how would you describe your best day?
Yeah. It's not flashy, right? It ultimately comes down to the people that I care about most. It's about, at the end of the day, being able to say I stewarded wisely. And it's not just about stewarding finances or stewarding my business, it's about stewarding the experiences that God has given me and being able to create impact at home or for others. So, truly just feeling peace and purpose and the fact that I have surrendered everything to God and that, like, comfort and faith knowing that He's got my best interest at the end of the day.
Wonderful answer. Well, thank you for coming on. I know you're busy. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the
Yes.
inspiration. Thanks for being a superwoman and giving us all something to look at and say, hey, look, if we can do that too. So thanks for the inspiration today. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you having me.
Yep. Well, that's all for today, folks. I appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully, it's inspired you as well. If you have more questions, certainly reach out to us, reach out to Lauren. Like I said, she really gets back to folks fairly quick if you have any questions in that realm. But if you want more information, you can always visit our site at centerforvictory.com. And just remember, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, make this your best day yet. We'll see you soon.